Hello and welcome to my chess lesson. So today we are going to see more ideas about mobility. Okay, so sometimes in chess material doesn't matter if there is no mobility. Like you can see here, this is one case. Black's material is huge, but the mobility is bad. Okay, so it is possible for white to win here technically. See, only two bishops. White has got only two bishops. You can see that. And these pieces, let's analyze these pieces. The bishop is not able to move, and both the rooks are not able to move, and these pawns are also not really able to move. Okay, only they have the A pawn. Okay, only that pawn can move. Other pieces are completely paralyzed. So here, find a way to win. You can take your time and come up with a very strong idea. This is a very instructive one. So how can white win here? So try to take advantage of this weakness. So you can think for a while and come up with a very strong idea. Okay. So first of all, we need to completely paralyze all the pieces, and also we should try to give chance for this pawn to move. Okay, so that the mobility will increase. So therefore, it is very important to play bishop to a5. So after bishop a5, they have only one more practically, which is pawn to a6. Okay, so pawn goes to a6. Now king has a new option, right? So king can get to a7. So how do you restrict the king's mobility? So black king is trying to get to a7, so we need to restrict that. So bishop has to go to b6. Okay, so they have a pawn moves. So pawn to a5. Okay, so only this pawn play is possible. Okay, so they have a couple of pawn moves. So how can we win here? So you can make a plan. Okay, king has to go to b5, and then they have to go pawn to a4. Okay, now king a6, so pawn goes to a3. Okay, so these pieces don't have any mobility, but a2 is coming here. So next move a2 is going to come. So how do we deal with that? So we have to do something about the a2. So what can be done here for a2? So a2, if a2 comes, bishop a2, then the rook is going to get mobility here. So you can come up with a very strong plan to stop a2, or you can allow a2, but you should make sure they don't get the rooks to play. That is very important. So you can try here. So bishop has to go to d8. This is a very strong idea. So after bishop d8, they don't have much options. They have to push. Okay. So now the point is you can capture on f6. Okay. Okay. So they have to queen. You can capture. Okay. You can capture. So they play pawn to f6. Okay. Now how to continue here? Why to play? So we have to make sure black has some mobility, because if there is no mobility, it's going to be a stalemate. So to increase the mobility, we have to sacrifice the bishop to e5, and then they have to capture. Now we can push. Okay, so let's say they play e4, and you can play f7 and then e3. And you can queen. So let's say they queen. They are ready to queen. Okay. So the b7 piece is pinned. So that means it's not really able to defend the a7 square. Right. So therefore we can take advantage of the weakness. So we have to go queen to f2. So once we go queen f2, see, there's no defense. So let's say the queen, and then we can play queen a7. Okay, so once again I repeat this, the entire position. So first thing you need to do is you need to get the king to this side, and then you have to give them some moves. Okay, because even though they have huge material, but they don't have mobility. Okay, so we will play bishop a5, and once they play a6, it's very important to play bishop b6 so that the king can cross the other side. So a5 is forced, and then we can go king to b5. Okay, so king to b5. So now a4, and king goes to the a6. So a3. So we have to go bishop d8. So a2, and then we take, so queens. So you see, the point is bishop e5. So now the pawn has some mobility. So meantime we can queen and win. Okay, so remaining all is easy. Okay, so going to the next example. Okay, this is one very instructive example. Black's material is huge. Okay, okay, okay. But the problem is the king's mobility. Okay, so the king on b4 is not really well placed. See, these pieces also don't have much mobility, but anyway, they can increase the mobility anytime. Okay, so we have to take advantage of the weak position of the king. So how can we continue here? So we can think for a while and come up with a very strong plan. And black also has to maintain the e3 square, because if black doesn't maintain the e3 square, then you can see like bishop is going to go to e3, and then bishop will get to d2. So bishop e3 is coming. Okay, if they play something like f3, bishop e3, bishop d2 is coming. Okay, so therefore they won't be able to move this pawns. This pawns has to stay there. Okay, any other try? So these pawns are paralyzed. Okay, even g2 also they can't move because the bishop will get mobility, and then you can force a mate. So you can think for a while and come up with a very strong plan here. Okay, so try to win. So white to play. So how can white take advantage of the weak position of black king? So first observe this and analyze. Okay, and then you will learn. Okay, so find the available squares for the king. The king has a5 and b4, right? So try to target these squares. Okay, so this could help you. So how to continue? Try. Okay, so we need to go a4. Basically, a4 is very strong. Okay, the idea is we are going to take the a5 square. For example, let's say they make the bishop move, something like this, and then we have a5. So now the king is not having any mobility, and then we have a strong threat, rook coming to a4. So that's very powerful. Okay, so a4, we'll see what happens if black plays a5. Okay, there are two options here. One is moving the king, and another option is moving the pawn. Okay, so let's say if they move the king, it's not difficult to spot that bishop c5 wins, because b4 there's no threat. So there's no threat for b4. Okay, I mean there's no defense for b4 threat. So they have to play a5. Okay, now king has no mobility. So now you can think for a while and come up with a very strong plan. So all you need is the b4 square. So the target is the b4 square. So how do you target the b4 square? Okay, so how do you target the b4 square? We can plan here and come up with a very strong idea. Try. So once we get the b4 square, we are going to win. But to reach the b4 square, see, the bishop cannot reach like this, because these pawns are fighting for these squares. So there's no way to get the bishop there. And of course, black is also not going to move any of these pawns, because if black moves g2, that would leave the square weak, and then the bishop could maneuver like this. And same thing with the f3, the bishop can go to e3 and connect to d2. So this is a very difficult situation, right, for black. But black can make bishop moves and then try to get the rook. Once the rook gets mobility, and black is of course going to win the game, because you see the king will get even more mobility. So we have to do something fast before that, because if we play very slow here, then black is going to get the bishop and the rook. So how do we continue here? So try. Okay, so the b4 square, the b4 is the important square, so you can analyze. So observe this and try to find a way to get the b4 square. If you could get the b4 square, then you can win. So how do you get the b4 square? So you can try. Okay, so here there's a surprise move, rook c1. Why rook c1? Because we want to get the rook to c4. Okay, but however the pawn is blocked, right? So what we can do is, let's say they play bishop a7. We want to push this. Now tactically we can do here with a sacrifice. So did you find what is coming? Did you see what is coming here? Bishop to d4, too strong, so the bishop is going to c3, and that would be a checkmate. Right, so they have to capture, and then we can play c5. Now the rook's mobility is also increased. Okay, so white improved here, and then there's no defense for the b4 square, so black position will collapse and black loses here. So after bishop c5, rook to c4. Okay, so here you can see, even though black had a huge material advantage, but still black is not able to win because of the mobility, because king's mobility is really bad. Okay, so I'll show another example. Okay, this time in this example you can see the material advantage will be really huge. Okay, this is to demonstrate the power of mobility. Okay, here you can see black material advantage is huge, and white actually has only the knight. Okay, but still white wins here. The only reason for white to win here is the mobility. So this is composed in such a way to demonstrate the power of the mobility. Okay, so you can observe this for some time, and you can come up with a very strong plan. Okay, so here we have a chance to gain a lot of tempos, but still we need to play the most accurate moves to win. Okay, and this is somewhat tricky. At first it looks easy, but it's not. Okay, there are a lot of technical ideas here, so you can observe this for a while. So you can try. Okay, so first move looks obvious, isn't it? So knight f4. Okay, that's fine. So knight has to go to f4. So king has to go to c5. Okay, we can of course win some materials with some tempo, but still they have so many pieces, right? So knight e6 check. The king has to go to d5. So now how do you continue here? So I think this is obvious, right? So knight takes. Okay, so king has to go to c5. Okay, now try. So again, okay, you can collect this also. Knight takes. So king has to go to d5. But this time you cannot capture on b4 because there is support. Okay, so again the knight has to go back to c7, forcing the king to c5. Okay, so now if we play knight e6, they are going to play king d5, and we won't be able to progress here, right? So the d5 square is a flight square for the king, so we need to make a plan here. So you can think and try to come up with a very strong idea. So how can we progress here? So d5 square. So you should find a way to control the d5 square. So how do you control the d5 square? So you can try. So first we should go king to e4, right? So if we play this, let's say if they play this, they are going to play here, right? So knight e6, king d5, and then knight f4. king here, but we should not capture this immediately. Okay, we should never capture this immediately, this pawn. If we capture that, it's only going to be a draw. So first we should lock the square d5. Now we are threatening knight takes d3. So we are trying to force a mate. So they don't have much options because there are two threats basically here. One is knight e6 and another one is knight d3. Okay, if they move this b4 rook, we have to go knight d3 because they have some mobility, right? So therefore they don't have much options here, therefore they have to play d5. So let's say they play d5. Okay, after d5 you have to see what are the changes that happens. Okay, and then you have to adapt to those changes. So you see, this square is now available, right? So we have to restrict that. So therefore the king has to go to e5. Very strong. So now knight d3 is a strong threat. Okay. Okay, so knight e6 is coming. Also knight d3 is a strong threat. Okay. So they will try to sacrifice the material just to create some space for the king. So therefore bishop has to go to f6, check. Now we can't go too far. If we go too far, the king is going to go to d6. Right, so we have to go to e6 forced, and then again they will try to attack with the knight. Okay, so the knight will go to d8. Okay, now we can think for a while and come up with a very strong plan. Okay, so where the king has to go, to which square? Because remember, d6 is the flight square for them. If allowed, then the king will get away. So we want to keep the d6 square in control. So therefore we have to play king to d7. Right, now threatening knight d3 because the e6 square is in control. Okay, so knight d3 is coming now, and in a single move the king is not really able to get away, because if they move the rook somewhere trying to give the b4 square, we have knight d3 coming anyway. You see, there's no defense at all. Even if they move something like this, we can capture. So it's forced. And okay, this pawn move is not going to help either because knight d3 is coming anyway. You see, going back to the position, you can see this is a perfect example of the mobility. Okay, so in chess, like if you have much material, it's a kind of advantage, but it doesn't mean all the time you can win. Okay, mobility is what decides the game. And you see, this is one perfect example, like instructive example. Okay, so to demonstrate the power of the mobility. Okay, so we can see a couple of examples related to this. Okay, before we go, I'll just recall some ideas here. So knight f4, king c5, knight e6, king d5, knight takes, king c5, knight takes a6, king d5, knight c7, king c5, knight e6, king d5, knight f4, king c5, and then king has to go to e4, trying knight e6 and knight d3. So d5 is forced, king e5, bishop f6, king has to go to e6 to restrict the mobility on d6. Okay, so therefore knight d8, and then we have to stay on d7. Again we have to restrict this. Okay, and it's over. Okay, going to the next example. So there are a lot of things you can learn if you observe the mobility of the pieces. Okay, 1 minute. I think we already saw this. earlier. Okay, so this is one very instructive example. Okay, so first move I'll help you. Okay, so all the moves are pretty forced here. Okay, so once again the mobility of this king. Okay, see, this king's mobility plays an important role here. So white, first move, white tried rook b7. Okay, just a forcing move, trying to capture. So let's say they capture. Okay, now if you observe, the knight is controlling the lights, I mean the dark squares, and the bishop is controlling the light squares. Okay, okay, we have a few pieces, but how can we force the king into a mating net? So bishop g6 is pretty forced, isn't it? So bishop has to capture on g6. So there's no other option. They have to recapture with the king. And then we can go queen g8, check. So there are two options. King h5 and king takes f5. Queen g7 is weak option, so we don't want to consider that. Okay, so let's say king h5 is also weak. They have to capture this, because if they go king h5, we can take support from the rook. So queen goes to g4. So queen g4 will force checkmate. So therefore they have to capture this. Okay, now we have only these two pieces and we have some pawns, right? But still a lot of pieces are very close to the king, so they can probably defend. But here white makes a brilliant checkmate, so you can think for a while. So the first obvious move is queen g4, isn't it? Yes, it is. Okay, so king e5. Now it's not so easy as it looks like, because you have to remember they have too many pieces nearby. Okay, also if you try some moves like d4, they are going to sacrifice and they are going to increase the king's mobility. So now you can think for a while and come up with a very strong idea. Okay, so queen h5, too strong. Okay, there are two options basically here. One is rook to f5, another one is to block with the pawn. Okay, blocking with the pawn opens a new line. You see, it opens this diagonal, and then you analyze the king's mobility. You will find that king actually has no mobility at all. This is the only square where the king can go. So we need these two squares, right? So therefore we can connect on h8, because if we take on h2, they would go to f6, right? So queen has to go to h8, check. And then there's only one defense, which is also a weak defense. They have to play queen g7, and we can capture. Okay, so going back. Okay, after queen g4 check, king has to go to e5. Okay, now you can play queen h5. So f5 is not really possible. I mean, it's not very strong. It is possible, but it's not very strong, because queen is going to h8 and that would end the game very quickly. So they have to block. So rook f5. Okay, now if you observe, some changes has happened. So you have to find what are the changes. Earlier this pawn wasn't able to move, right? Now you have chance to push this pawn. Okay, this is one option. Okay, so here white has a brilliant finish. Can you spot it? Even though a lot of black pieces are nearby, white's attack is too strong. You can observe and try to figure a strong move. Okay, you can figure out a very strong move. It's possible. So pawn to f4 is the brilliant move. So here there are two captures possible. One is with the knight and another one is with the bishop. Okay, so let's say if they capture with the bishop. Okay, so now we want to play d4, but this knight is there. Not only that, if we push pawn to d4, the king has mobility. Right, see, I'm making a weak move here. Suppose if we push this pawn, the king has mobility here. Right. So you have to remember, whenever we move the pawn, the king is getting a square there. Okay, and also if you push, the knight is also there to defend. So we can basically get rid of the knight with a brilliant queen sacrifice. Can you spot it? So queen has to go to e2. Very good move. So bishop has to capture. So bishop has to capture. Okay. So now if you play d4, king is getting mobility here. So we need to lock this square. So we can sacrifice the rook also. See? Now you can see white has very less material, but black has a huge material, but still black loses. It's because of the mobility. So this is another very instructive example to demonstrate the mobility, you see. So pawn to d4, it's a forced mate. Okay, so we'll see the other options also. So bishop f4 is one option. The other option is knight f4. Right, knight f4, this time there's no much defense for the d4 because there's no knight here. So you can repeat the same idea. You see, the rook has to go to e4, check, and then they have to capture. Now we can push. Okay, so this is too strong. One push, it's a forced mate. Okay, so going back, I repeat once again. You see, so rook b7, queen has to take, bishop g6, king has to take, queen g8, king has to take, and then queen g4, check. King has to go to e5. Okay, now the brilliant move is queen h5. Okay, and then f5 leads to queen h8. So rook f5, and we can unlock this pawn. So the idea is to lock the square and to restrict the king's mobility completely. So after bishop f4, we can get rid of the defender. Okay, so bishop takes. Again, we can't play directly d4 because king is having mobility on e4. So therefore, we have to play rook to e4. Okay, so pawn takes, and then we can play d4. You see the mobility. So we saw a couple of examples related with the mobility. So it's very clear, like it's not about material advantage all the time in chess. Okay, so mobility plays an important role, and mobility is what decides a piece. Okay, whether a piece is good or bad. Okay, okay. So today, some players wanted to play some games, but since I'm teaching about the mobility, so wasn't able to play. So in the next upcoming streaming, I will try to play more games. Okay, so you can observe this, so analyze, observe, and then learn. Okay, so hope this helps you. Okay, have a nice day. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.